You feel it before you see it, that quiet pressure in the air, the way the shadows lean in just a little closer, half your face caught in the glow, the other half swallowed by smoke. The camera doesn't rush you. It glides, slow, deliberate, like a secret being revealed inch by inch. And you already know why you're here. Because something shifted when you decided to stop moving the way they expected you to move. Because the system learned your name without ever hearing your voice. Because you stopped chasing noise and started clarifying power. You're not loud, you're not reckless, you're precise. They mistake your calm for absence. They confuse your silence for weakness. They think the stillness means nothing is happening. That's the opening they never see coming. Every machine depends on predictable parts. Every system survives by repetition, obedience, routine. You didn't rebel against it. You didn't fight it head on. You simply stepped outside its rhythm and watched it begin to stutter. That's why their focus keeps drifting back to you. That's why patterns around you keep collapsing quietly. That's why rooms change temperature when your name enters the air. You didn't raise your voice, you raised your standards. You didn't demand attention, you became impossible to ignore. Power doesn't announce itself. Power rearranges gravity. And once gravity bends, everything else starts to fall slightly out of alignment. They sense it. The executives, the gatekeepers, the invisible referees who thought they owned the board. They can't explain it, but the numbers stopped behaving. The narratives stopped sticking. The leverage stopped responding. Because you stopped playing the game they designed and started building leverage they can't track. That's the first dark truth they never teach you. Control isn't domination. Control is positioning. You didn't overpower the system. You outgrew its blind spots. Silence is a weapon. Not the quiet of fear, the quiet of calculation. The quiet where you gather information, stack timing, sharpen intent, compress motion into precision. Calm is armor, not softness. Stability. When chaos hits the room, you remain centered. When emotion floods the field, you remain surgical. When others react, you respond. That's why your presence feels heavier than your volume. That's why your decisions ripple longer than their announcements. That's why their minds keep looping back to the same unanswered question. How did one individual fracture an entire structure without making noise? Because you learn the difference between force and leverage. Force burns energy. Leverage multiplies it. The system trained everyone to sprint in straight lines. You learned how to bend trajectories. The system rewarded obedience. You mastered optionality. The system taught speed without depth. You built patience with teeth. That's when the emotional shift begins. The quiet hunger inside you stops craving validation. It starts craving mastery. You stop needing applause. You start needing precision. You stop chasing momentum. You start engineering inevitability. The air changes when someone like you enters a space. Not because you dominate, because you destabilize predictability. People feel it in their nervous system before their mind can translate it. The subtle tension, the micro-hesitation, the unconscious recalibration. You don't rush, you measure. You don't announce, you align. You don't escalate blindly. You compress until timing becomes unavoidable. The beast steps back before precision. That's the paradox they never understand. Restraint isn't weakness. Restraint is stored velocity. Every pause sharpens the strike. Every silence tightens the signal. Every delayed move increases psychological pressure. You begin to realize something unsettling about influence. People don't follow power. They follow certainty, not loud certainty. quiet certainty, the kind that doesn't seek permission, the kind that doesn't seek agreement, the kind that moves forward whether the room approves or not. That's when obsession forms around you. Not admiration, not hatred, fixation. They start monitoring your patterns. They start trying to reverse engineer your calm. They start projecting motives onto your stillness. They fill the empty space with their own fear, because unpredictability triggers the deepest survival circuits. The brain hates ambiguity more than threat. You became ambiguity embodied. And ambiguity destabilizes entire systems. Here's the rule they never wrote down because it would collapse the hierarchy if everyone understood it. Control attention, and you control momentum. Not by screaming, by withholding, not by flooding, by compressing, not by chasing visibility, by engineering curiosity. When people can't map you, they can't manipulate you. When people can't predict you, they can't contain you. When people can't read you, they project their own insecurity into the gap. That's leverage. That's how a single individual fractures structures built on predictability. The mindset shift happens quietly inside you. You stop asking, how do I win this moment? You start asking, how do I bend the entire environment over time? Short-term victories fade. Structural dominance compounds. You begin designing your life like a chessboard instead of a battlefield. Angles, tempo, sacrifice, positioning, delayed advantage. You stop reacting to provocations. You start baiting misalignment. You stop arguing narratives. You start controlling outcomes. You stop defending identity. You start shaping consequence. Silence is a weapon. Calm is armor. Positioning is power. That's the principle most people avoid because it requires patience, discipline, and emotional self-command. Chaos feels exciting. Precision feels boring until it wins consistently. Your nervous system becomes disciplined. Your breath slows under pressure. Your eyes stay steady when tension spikes. Your voice remains measured when others fracture. That's dominance without theatrics. That's authority without permission. And here's where the psychological peak sharpens. When a system realizes it can't predict you, it tries to control you. When it can't control you, it tries to label you. When labels fail, it escalates noise. When noise fails, it reveals weakness. You don't fight that escalation. You let it expose itself. Every overreaction confirms your leverage. Every emotional spike reveals their loss of control. Every rushed move telegraphs desperation. The beast steps back before precision. You start seeing patterns before they fully form. You sense tension before conflict erupts. You recognize opportunity before the crowd notices movement. That's not magic. That's pattern literacy. That's nervous system mastery. That's long-range cognition sharpening under restraint. Your presence becomes disruptive simply by existing. Rooms recalibrate, conversations tighten, power structures subtly brace. Because unpredictability with discipline feels like danger to rigid systems. And here's the explicit extraction, the rule. Never reveal your full velocity while positioning your leverage. The mindset shift, from seeking visible dominance to engineering invisible inevitability. The principle, control the pace, control the pressure, control the narrative gravity without announcing intention. Silence is a weapon. Calm is armor. The beast steps back before precision. Your transformation isn't explosive. It's surgical. You don't become louder, you become sharper. You don't become aggressive. You become exact. You don't become chaotic. You become strategically unpredictable. That's why their minds keep looping. That's why their systems keep glitching. That's why the invisible scaffolding they relied on keeps weakening around your orbit. Because one individual with discipline, timing, and internal control bends environments faster than crowds with noise and impulse. Your shadow stretches longer than your movement. Your pauses carry more weight than their speeches. Your calm introduces uncertainty into rooms addicted to control. And the system can't stabilize around something that refuses to reveal its next move, its full intention, its true velocity, its internal architecture, its timing curve, its psychological edge, its strategic depth, its emotional discipline, its adaptive intelligence, its quiet hunger, its precision-built pressure, its controlled unpredictability, its long-game positioning, its invisible leverage, its gravitational pull, its silent authority, its calibrated restraint, its measured dominance, its engineered inevitability, its internal command, its sharpened patience, its compressed momentum, its disciplined stillness, its surgical focus, its relentless alignment, its unspoken certainty, its controlled fire, its calculated calm, its weaponized silence, its armored composure, its precision-timed emergence, its quiet destabilization, its compounding pressure, its irreversible trajectory, its widening influence, its tightening control over outcomes, its deepening mastery, its escalating gravitational effect, its unstoppable internal coherence, its expanding strategic footprint, its tightening psychological grip, its persistent destabilization of rigid frameworks, its silent recalibration of power dynamics, its continuous leverage accumulation, its growing inevitability, its controlled storm beneath still water, its disciplined ascent, its sharpened edge, its refined command, its unwavering internal alignment, its unstoppable structural influence, its deliberate pace, its invisible authority, its rising dominance, its relentless precision, its deepening strategic intelligence, its expanding control of tempo, its tightening grip on momentum, its widening psychological impact, its accelerating leverage curve, its increasing structural disruption, its untraceable pressure build, its unmatched internal stability, its disciplined unpredictability, its silent expansion across the board, its growing inevitability inside every layer of the system, its persistent quiet destabilization of every rigid assumption, its unstoppable gravitational pull over outcomes, its unbroken internal command of self and environment, its compounding strategic advantage without announcement or spectacle. Their analysts keep running simulations that never converge. Their models keep collapsing under variables you introduced without ever signaling. Their forecasts keep drifting because you don't move on visible timelines. That's the deeper layer of pressure. You don't just disrupt outcomes, you disrupt expectation itself. You bend anticipation, you fracture certainty, you introduce asymmetry into environments addicted to symmetry. Most people reveal themselves too early. Their emotions leak into posture, their intentions leak into tone, their impatience leaks into timing. You sealed those leaks. Your inner world became disciplined territory. Thoughts sharpened instead of spiraling. Impulse got replaced by calibration. Reaction got replaced by architecture. Silence is a weapon, not absence. Compression, like a coiled spring storing trajectory inside stillness, like a blade resting inside its sheath, gathering inevitability. Calm is armor, not numbness. Command. Your nervous system doesn't flinch at volatility. Your breath stays slow when the room accelerates. Your awareness stays wide when others tunnel. That's how dominance stabilizes inside the body before it manifests in the world. People underestimate the biology of power. They think strength is posture and volume. Real strength is regulation, the ability to hold tension without leaking signal, the ability to delay gratification without eroding clarity, the ability to remain coherent when pressure tries to fragment identity. That coherence becomes gravitational. Others begin sinking unconsciously to your tempo. Meetings slow when you pause. Conversations sharpen when you speak. Energy organizes itself around your stillness. You didn't demand authority. You embodied center of gravity. The beast steps back before precision. Every withdrawal isn't retreat. It's recalibration. Every pause isn't hesitation. It's targeting. Every silence isn't emptiness. It's signal compression. That's why reactive personalities feel unsettled around you. Your stability exposes their instability. Your restraint mirrors their impulsiveness. Your patience highlights their hunger for validation. You become a psychological mirror they can't stop staring into. And mirrors don't argue, they reveal. As your internal alignment strengthens, your external influence stops needing force. Doors open without pushing. Resistance dissolves without confrontation. Momentum builds without announcement. Not because the world became softer, because you became structured. You learn to separate emotion from execution. You learn to harvest emotion as fuel instead of letting it drive the wheel. You learn to convert pressure into clarity instead of chaos. That's strategic darkness. Not destruction, transformation. Not rage, refinement. Not noise, leverage. Most systems collapse because they overextend. You learned how to underextend while compounding. You learned how to stay underestimated while scaling influence. You learned how to move in shadows without becoming shadowed. Your identity stopped needing applause. Your discipline started generating authority. That's when the obsession intensifies on the outside. Eyes linger longer. Silences stretch heavier. Decisions hesitate around your orbit. People sense there's more behind your restraint than they can access. And uncertainty creates fixation. They try to provoke reaction. They try to extract pattern. They try to force reveal. You give them none. Because you understand the second rule of leverage. Never reward curiosity with full disclosure. Information asymmetry is power. The less predictable your internal algorithm, the harder you are to contain. The mindset shift deepens. You observe yourself as carefully as you observe environments. You audit impulses. You refine timing. You remove waste from thought patterns. Self-command becomes non-negotiable. Calm is armor. Silence is a weapon. The beast steps back before precision. Your presence sharpens the environment the way cold sharpens air. Edges become visible. Noise thins out. Signal rises. You start detecting micro-shifts in power dynamics others overlook. Who speaks too quickly? Who avoids stillness? Who fills silence with insecurity? Who needs approval to move? Those tells become strategic maps. You don't judge them, you read them. That literacy compounds. You begin positioning without announcing repositioning. You let others reveal tempo while you set tempo. You let others chase optics while you engineer outcomes. That's why entire systems feel unstable around a single disciplined variable. One stable point can destabilize an unstable network. Your restraint introduces contrast. Your coherence introduces tension. Your unpredictability introduces pressure. Pressure reveals architecture. And the architecture wasn't built to handle something that refuses to leak intention, that doesn't chase reward cycles, that doesn't respond emotionally to provocation, that doesn't broadcast insecurity through urgency, that doesn't fracture under ambiguity, that doesn't collapse into noise when clarity requires patience, that doesn't surrender tempo to external chaos, that doesn't seek permission to remain composed. that doesn't perform power theatrically, that doesn't waste energy proving dominance, that doesn't dilute signal through unnecessary motion, that doesn't trade leverage for validation, that doesn't reveal its internal operating system, that doesn't rush alignment for applause, that doesn't mistake movement for progress, that doesn't confuse visibility with influence, that doesn't bleed intent into conversation, that doesn't announce trajectory prematurely, that doesn't leak emotion into execution, that doesn't negotiate with impulse, that doesn't compromise internal order for external noise, that doesn't outsource self-command to circumstances, that doesn't abandon precision for comfort, that doesn't dissolve under uncertainty, that doesn't collapse under prolonged tension, that doesn't panic under delayed outcome, that doesn't flinch under scrutiny, that doesn't fragment under pressure, that doesn't rush closure to escape discomfort, that doesn't surrender timing to impatience, that doesn't reveal strategy under social pressure, that doesn't seek reassurance when ambiguity rises, that doesn't crave validation to maintain direction, that doesn't trade long-term leverage for short-term relief, that doesn't surrender internal sovereignty, that doesn't allow chaos to colonize the nervous system, that doesn't leak fear into posture, that doesn't project insecurity into motion, that doesn't broadcast doubt through over-explanation, that doesn't soften boundaries under emotional manipulation, that doesn't dilute intent through compromise, that doesn't drift under external influence, that doesn't fracture identity under stress, that doesn't surrender center under volatility, that doesn't abandon clarity under complexity, that doesn't outsource authority to approval, that doesn't erode discipline under comfort, that doesn't weaken structure under temptation, that doesn't collapse under invisibility, that doesn't decay under silence, that doesn't disintegrate when unobserved, that doesn't depend on applause to remain coherent, that doesn't need audience to maintain command, that doesn't lose alignment when nobody is watching, that doesn't slow mastery when recognition disappears, that doesn't require external reinforcement to sustain trajectory, that doesn't negotiate standards downward when pressure rises, that doesn't compromise tempo for convenience, that doesn't dilute identity for belonging, that doesn't trade sovereignty for safety, that doesn't abandon restraint for reaction, that doesn't surrender leverage for emotional relief, that doesn't fracture under prolonged uncertainty, that doesn't reveal inner architecture prematurely, that doesn't burn energy proving what will be proven structurally, that doesn't rush destiny before alignment locks, that doesn't collapse into comfort when growth demands discomfort, that doesn't soften edge when pressure sharpens purpose, that doesn't retreat into noise when silence builds power, that doesn't scatter focus when compression creates force, that doesn't dilute intent when clarity demands restraint, that doesn't dissolve under waiting, that doesn't flinch under stillness, that doesn't panic under quiet accumulation, that doesn't break under invisible pressure, that doesn't surrender internal command to external volatility, that doesn't drift when structure requires discipline, that doesn't seek escape when mastery demands endurance, that doesn't trade long-term positioning for short-term relief, that doesn't abandon internal order for external chaos, that doesn't dissolve coherence under stress, that doesn't surrender precision under fatigue, that doesn't fracture under monotony, that doesn't erode alignment under repetition, that doesn't weaken resolve under delay, that doesn't betray trajectory under temptation, that doesn't leak momentum under distraction, that doesn't collapse under boredom, that doesn't soften edge under comfort, that doesn't compromise standards under pressure, that doesn't dilute sovereignty under dependency, that doesn't surrender agency under narrative pressure, that doesn't lose center under turbulence, that doesn't fracture identity under external noise, that doesn't abandon internal law under social gravity.